Welcome to Villegas Patterns. In this video tutorial, I will show you how to make my new sewing pattern, the Pitaya garden mini dress. This dress is inspired by the traditional Bavarian dress called dinner. This dress has a deep neckline, which makes it perfect to wear with a blouse or a t-shirt underneath. The sample shown is made of a red cotton fabric, which makes it suitable for spring and summer days, but you can use a different fabric and make a winter dress of it. This is how to start assembling your Pitaya garden sewing pattern. Remember, this pattern is made to be printed in A4 and US letter pages. Bring only the first page of the pattern and measure the control box placed at the top left. This box must be 5 x 5 cm or 2 x 2 inches. If the measurements are correct, print the remaining pattern pages. The pattern is a total of 20 pages. The pattern is placed in a light gray box. We will start gluing the pages horizontally at first, and later we will join them vertically. We will begin by gluing pages 1 till 5 together. Start with pages 1 and 2, add the third page, and so on. We will finish this round with page 5. This is what it should look like. Put these pages to the side and continue by gluing pages 6 to 10 together. Later, glue pages 11 till 15. Finish with pages 16 to 20. Now that all pages are joined horizontally, glue them together vertically. This is how the final pattern assembly should look like. Now, at the top left, you will find a list with the measurements. In this table, you will only have to take 2 measurements to count. The first is the bust measurement and the second is the waist measurement. The length of this dress will always be the same. Prioritize the bust or chest measurement, as you will have enough seam allowance to make any changes at the waist. Each size has its own cut line. This is the included seam allowance. For my pattern, I will be sewing the size 34 or 2, so I will have to cut through these dots. Now I'm going to cut out the skirt pattern using the lines I chose. Repeat with the remaining pieces. At the end, you should have one front and one back skirt piece. These pieces are called a top side piece, a top front, a top back, and the small one is the upper piece. I want to show you some important aspects of the pattern. As with the top front piece, you have a description on the center front that says unfold. Read each piece carefully before cutting it. You will also find the name of the pattern, the name of the piece, how many pieces you will need, and in this case, that is a piece that needs to be cut on fold. On the bottom and side you will find notches. All notches you find should be transferred into the fabric. At the waist, you will find a notch. This mark to help you differentiate between the waist and the neckline. Remember that all pieces have a seam allowance. In this case, at the side seam is 2 cm or 3/4 inches. On this piece, you can also see the grain line, which you need to align with the fabric lengthwise. Now it's time to talk about the materials I'm going to use. We start with the basics, the fabric scissors and a small one for the details as the notches. We also need a ruler and chalk. I have this one that has a pen shape. For me, it's easier to handle, but you can use also the classic one. Sewing thread to match the fabric you want to work with. In this case, red to match my fabric color. Sewing machine needles. In this case, I use thin needles as my fabric is very sheer and delicate. Besides the normal presser foot, you will also need a special one to sew the invisible zip. The length of the invisible zip should not be less than 40 cm or 16 inches. In this case, we won't be using an overlock machine, so we need a bias tape. This one is pre-fold, above 50 meters of cotton quality. We will also need interfacing tape to reinforce some of the seams. The 2 cm or 3/4 inches white tape will be used to reinforce the left side seam for sewing the invisible zip. To reinforce the bodice, you will need the 1 cm white interfacing tape, or 3/8. Before you start, you will need to cut the interfacing tape to a width of 0.7 cm or 1/4 inches. We will reduce the 1 cm white interfacing tape to 0.7 cm because we don't want the tape to be visible on the left side of the fabric. Remember, we're using haute couture techniques. Also, to keep the base in shape while ironing or pressing, you can use a tool like that, or you can use something else that has like a round shape. Before we can cut the fabric, you should press it or wash the fabric to prevent it from shrinking. Now, place the fabric on a surface and fold it so that the right side of the fabric stays inside. Start placing the skirt panels directly on the fold and pin them in place. The top, back and front piece must also be placed on the fold, but if you want, you can add 1 cm seam allowance to the center and place these pieces elsewhere. I will place these pieces on the fold because I have enough fabric. Now I will pin them in place. To cut, use your fabric scissors and cut out the pieces. Very important is to not forget to mark the notches. That's why you need a small scissor, so we don't cut in too deep. Also, cut into the fold so we know where the center front or back is. continue by cutting all the remaining pieces of the pattern. Now that you have removed the pattern from the fabric, we need to reinforce the left side of the fabric using the interfacing tape. With the 0.7 cm or 1/4 wide interfacing tape we have prepared before, we will reinforce the back necklines, back armhole, front neckline, upper piece neckline, front neckline, and front armhole. Later, use the 1 cm or 3/8 inches interfacing tape to reinforce the back and front shoulders. Now, place the front skirt panel on the table with the left fabric side facing upwards, and reinforce the left side seam with the 2 cm or 3/4 inches interfacing tape. The tape must be pressed from the waistline to about 2 cm or 3/4 inches below the side seam notch. Now, place the back skirt panel with the left fabric side facing up and reinforce the right side seam with the 2 cm or 3/4 inches interfacing tape. These tapes will stick to your fabric thanks to the glue dots on the wrong side of the tape. I will leave a link on the description where you can buy them. At the armhole, press only the tape halfway through the curve. I have not mentioned it before, but you need to reinforce the back body's right side seam with the 2 cm or 3/4 inches tape. That's where the zip will be attached. At the front side bodies, also press the 2 cm or 3/4 inches tape only on the left piece. Fuse the neckline and armholes with the 0.7 cm and 1/4 inches interfacing tape, snipping to adjust the tape to the curve. Finally, press the 1 cm or 3/8 tape onto the shoulders. Press the 0.7 cm or 1/4 wide tape to the upper piece's neckline, and with the 1 cm wide tape, reinforce the seam allowances, so it doesn't stretch as you sew. The last piece we're going to press or tape on is the top front. Just fix the tape at the neckline. At this stage, you can also press your bias tape open to finish our seams with the open or closed Hong Kong seam. Here, you can also press flat your invisible zip. Before we start the sewing of our dress, we will have a quick look at it in the future. This is what the dress will look like when almost finished. We're going to use two different terms to describe the finish of the seams. The first is the closed Hong Kong seam, which will be used to finish the neckline, armhole, and hem. The second terminology is the open Hong Kong seam, which is used to finish all seam allowances. I have chosen not to overlock my seams this time because the fabric is very delicate, but I need to finish the seam allowance anyway. The open Hong Kong seam gives a clean look. Trust me, it's not difficult to make. Decide whether to overlock or use the Hong Kong seam finish. take what works better for you. Now, using the open Hong Kong seam, I will finish my skirt side seams and all the vertical body seams. This also includes the shoulders. Practically, I will use the open Hong Kong seam for all seams that will not be seen when the dress is finished, because they will lay in the inside of the dress. How to achieve the open Hong Kong seam? Place the right side of the bias tape on the right fabric side, aligning the outer edges. Then, stitch the bias tape to the seam allowance 0.5 cm or 3/16 from the raw edge. I will start the neckline and work all the way towards the waistline. I place the raw edge on the other edge of my presser foot. It is exactly 0.5 or 3/16 wide. When you have sewn the tape to the waist, cut the tape off, leaving 2 cm or 3/4 inches of tape at the beginning and the end. Press the bias tape towards the seam allowance, then fold it over the raw edges. The next step is to secure the bias tape onto the fabric. You can use a technique called stitch in the ditch, where you can stitch directly on the seam, or secure the bias by stitching at 0.5 cm above the seam. I'm going to stitch in the ditch, but you are free to choose whichever method is easiest for you. Next, you will need to reduce the bias tape shown on the left side of the fabric. Use a small scissors and be careful not to cut into the fabric. Finish by pressing the seam. And this is how you achieve the open Hong Kong seam. Here, I just wanted to show you how to finish the upper pieces. I almost finished one seam allowance, but before stitching in the ditch, I simply folded the bias inwards and give a clean finish, and then I stitch in the ditch. Now we can begin sewing all pieces together. To start, take the upper pieces and mark the end stitching point on the left side of the fabric. Use your erasable pencil to make your marks. This is where you will stop sewing when you attach these pieces to the bodies. Make this mark on both pieces. Now join the front bodice piece from the bust notch until the waist. Leave the top part open so you will attach later the upper pieces. But now we can't see what the notch is because of the open Hong Kong seam finish. So you will need to place the pattern on top and mark the bust notch again. Then, place the front side piece on the top front, right side facing, and pin these pieces together from the notch until the waist. And use to pin also the neckline, but only to keep the seams at the same height. Now, stitch the seams with 1 cm or 3/8 inches seam allowance. The next step is to attach the upper pieces to the front of the bodice. Place the upper piece onto the bodice front, right side facing, and pin from the neckline to the pre-marked end point. The end point must lay in the seam that joins the top front to the top side. Join the seams at 1 cm or 3/8 inches. Now, close the other side following the previous steps. This is how the front of the bodice should look. Now, close the left side seam, the side with any anti-facing tape on it. Place the front bodice with the right side facing up and the back bodice on the top, right side facing. Stitch the side seam at 2 cm or 3/4 inches. Press all seams flat. Then, press the side seam open and do the same with the front seam. To press the bust, use a round surface and press the seam to the sides. If you don't know which is the front and back skirt panels, you can lay them on top of each other. The back skirt panel has a more pronounced waistline, while the front skirt is more straight at the waistline. Place the front skirt and the back skirt panel on top, right side facing, and stitch the left side seam together at 2 cm or 3/4 inches. On the right side, this part must remain open to attach the invisible zip. Place the pattern on top and match the side seam notch again. Stitch the side seam from the notch to the hem at 2 cm or 3/4 inches. Press the seam flat and then open. Now it's time to fold the box pleats at the waistline. You will find 5 notches at the waist. Take the outer notches, 1st and 5th, and bring them together, right side facing. Pin them together and stitch about 3 cm from the notches down. When you have done this, bring the 3rd notch to meet notches 1 and 3 to create your box pleat. Stitch at the seam allowance to hold the pleat in place. Fold the box pleat in the back of the skirt and finish by pressing. Back to the bodice. Close only one shoulder seam, leaving the other open to give a clean neckline finish. You will see later. Sew the shoulder with a 1 cm or 3/8 inches seam allowance. And reduce the protruding bias. Now it's time to finish the neckline. We will start attaching the bias tape at the front shoulder and finish at the back shoulder. Now we will be doing the closed Hong Kong seams, which will be also used to finish the armholes. The procedure is the same as for the open Hong Kong seam, but with a twist at the end, which will be seen soon. Also, don't stretch the tape as you sew. Okay, now comes the twist. To make the bias tape invisible from the outside, you need to turn it inwards and press it. Once it's pressed, shorten the end of the bias and tuck them between the seams. Finish this step by top stitching the bias around the neckline, 0.5 cm or 3/16 inches from the outer edge. And do the same process with the armholes. And this is the result. Close the still open shoulder by sewing up to 1 cm or 3/8 inches and then pressing it open. Now it's time to join the skirt to the bodice at the waist. Place both pieces right to right. Matching the center from bodice notch to the box split. Match the center back bodice notch to the box split as well. Stitch the seam at 1 cm or 3/8 inches. Overlock the seam or use the open Hong Kong seam. Sew the bias tape on the skirt side as the seam will be pressed upwards, so we won't be able to see the raw edge of the bias tape. Fold the edges inwards and stitch in place. Finish by pressing the waist seam upwards. Attaching the zip. The easiest way to attach the zip to the dress is to draw a line 0.8 cm from the outer edge. This line must be drawn on the right side of the fabric. I also like to mark when I'm going to stop sewing, but this isn't necessary. On the left side of the zip, mark where the top stop will just stop. This line will be placed exactly on the armhole. Open the zip and place the right side on the right side of the fabric, aligning the tape with the line we drew earlier. Pin the zip in place. For a perfectly sewn invisible zip, push the zip teeth to the side as you sew. Change the presser foot to the special one for invisible zips. We want the waistline to be at the same height. So, we will mark where the zip will meet the waistline and position this mark on the side seam we're about to sew. Pin the tape to the fabric, right to right, and sew the zip into place. Turn the puller to the right side of the fabric and press the side seam open. Turn the upper zip edges inwards and stitch them in place to prevent them from sticking out. If your zip is too long as mine, shorten it to 3 cm or 1 inch and finish the bottom with the open Hong Kong seam, the same that we use for the seam allowances. Stitch the zip to the seam allowance for a nice and clean finish. This is how it should look like. The zip is no longer moving around. The very last step to finish this project is to make the hem. For this, we will use the closed Hong Kong seam, the same technique as we use for the neckline and armhole. Take one side seam and open few stitches, something about 3 cm or 1 inch. Place the bias tape right to right and go through the whole process, stitching the seam and reduce the bias tape. Close the side seam we opened before. Now turn the bias to the inside of the dress and press. Finish by stop stitching the hem and 0.5 cm or 3/16 inches. Press your beautiful dress and have fun wearing it. Thank you!